A tuple is similar to a list, but it's not mutable. And there's a couple more things, but that is the main big deal. So remember that a list is something like this, where you can have some numbers or strings representing numbers. And you could also print the list. And if you save it and run it, we get something just like this. The big deal with the list is that we could also add, after we create the list, we can add to the list and modify the list. So we can say mylist.append. If you remember, there's a quick little video. We could append and say append what? Well, let's append 4. And if we run this, we're not going to get the 4, but if we print it again, we are going to get the 4. And we get something like this. Now, what's a tuple? A tuple, like I said, is similar to a list, but it's immutable. Basically, we could not modify it. First of all, how do we create a tuple? Well, we do the parentheses instead of the hard brackets. And if we run this and we save it and run it, we're going to see that we're going to print the tuple. Let's just say tuple here, so that we don't get confused. And we're going to see that we're going to print it, and there's going to be an issue. So we're going to print the tuple, and we're going to see an issue because you cannot modify it. So you cannot append this tuple. You can't change it. So that's one big deal with the tuple. By the way, there's a couple things that you could check what you can and cannot do, right, with the tuple. So for example, so we know we can't append, but one thing that you can do is say, okay, what can I do? Well, you can print the dir of my tuple, or you can just say of tuple, of any tuple, right? If you remember, I think I did a video about this already, so you can look this up, where we use dir just to see what's available, and dir is just a directory. It's just in programming, it's just meant to show the contents, in this case of the current scope, or in this case specifically about a tuple. What's all the methods and attributes that this tuple object has, or the tuple object period. And this is what you get. You can see that there is no append here, right? If you look through it, you'll have to believe me, there is no append here. You can count and you can index it and you can get the size and you can get all the dunder methods. But if you say list, you'll see that the list does have some methods that are for mutability, like append, copy, extend, insert, pop, remove, things that modify the current list. So that's how dir can come to the rescue, and you can turn you could tell a lot of things about and get information about a lot of things that you want to get. So keep that in mind, and just remember that by that same token, since you can't modify a tuple, you cannot do something like this, like at my tuple index number 1, let's modify that to 19. We can't do this, right? So I tell you, the tuple object does not support item assignment. So you can't reassign after something like a tuple is created. After the tuple is created, you can't assign anything to it. You can't modify the elements to it. Now, when do you want to do that? Well, when you have some requirement in your program, in your code, that you want to make sure that the values stay consistent throughout the program and they're not changed. Now, if you wanted to, I know this is probably the next question, well, Ed, why don't we have the ability to have a tuple and then create a list, from the tuple, and then maybe we can create it, cast it back to a tuple again? Well, you can. You'll have to do a little bit more work, but you can certainly do that. So you can print the tuple now, and then what you could do is you can say, well, my tuple, let's make it a list, right? You can cast it over to a list, and that will be my tuple. And now you can see that if you print my tuple, you actually created a tuple first, and then you made a list second. That's very, very important that you could do that. And you could do that with other collection types as well that we'll cover in next videos. But just keep that in mind. This is what the whole idea of immutability is, and you have to be clear about that, because otherwise you can get some things that you don't expect, like something blowing up, like I just showed you. The last thing I wanted to talk about a tuple is that functions, and if you haven't learned about functions yet, go back and look at my video about functions. But a function returns a tuple, and so let me show you what I mean by that. I just wanted to bring up that conversation within tuples so that we could, for context. But let's just say that here I want to return two values, return 2 and 4, and we can do that with a function, right? Every function should take some input and it should return some output. This case is not going to take some input just for demonstration purposes, but it is going to return 2 values. And so when I invoke this function and I want to print the values that are returned by this function, I want to see what happens. Well, we get a tuple, 2 and 4, and that's the beauty of functions. The functions return a tuple because it's easier to pack and unpack, many different elements. So whatever it is that you wanted to do, you could do something like that, and you could have multiple things. It becomes a tuple. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Well, what about if it's one thing? It's not a tuple. Well, it results to just one because it does that by default, right? But it is a tuple, and that's just something to keep in mind. And if you are not convinced that this is obviously a tuple by the way it is returning, you could always say, hey, go ahead and print the type of test, and you would be convinced that we get a class tuple, a tuple. So I hope this makes sense.